Hello, everybody. Now, we have to be safe, right, in this era of COVID, but actually, I don't think I'm even on the same day as most of you, so I think it's probably safe to take this off, don't you think? I'm going to dramatically extend work I did previously comparing male and female swimmers. There was a big surprise that came up when I did the analysis, and at the end, I'm going to introduce you to two really amazing female swimmers from the past, female athletes from the past. So I'm calling this understanding female over male velocity ratio versus distance for all swimming strokes, but not just swimming strokes in the pool. I'm going to include the English and Catalina Channel swims. Okay, the old and the new. Previously, I combined all pool distances and strokes in swimming. I showed that the velocity ratio of women over men increased in the past until it became consistent with equal training and efficiency using laws of physics, kinesiology, and physiology. And I'm going to be talking about the importance of lean to weight ratio shortly. Now, we want to know, is there a trend of velocity ratio versus distance? So let's go to kinesiology and physics. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. The action, in terms of power, is the power a swimmer develops times efficiency. That's the action. It makes a swimmer move through the water. The water pulls back with drag times velocity, and that power equalizes. Okay, on an ergometer, you or I can go into a lab, and the power we generate depends on lean body mass and on training. Now, when I say that, that means that for equally trained athletes, the power they generate will be in direct proportion to lean body mass. But more important than that is the lean to weight ratio. That's lean body mass divided by total body mass, which approximates power to weight. And that's usually important, whether we're talking about swimmers, automobile, aircraft, whatever. But now drag force. That's dynamic force, dynamic pressure times the area affected. But that's the tough one, finding how much area is affected. So what we do is multiply the drag pressure times the approximate area. We replace affected area with approximate area times drag coefficient. I was an aerospace designer for 7 years. This was the single most important thing, finding the drag coefficient, thereby finding out how much drag we had, therefore controlling the aircraft. The reason that Boeing 737 MAXs have crashed is this calculation. And they're still not recertified. So how do we find drag coefficient for aircraft, boats, for swimmers? We divide the measured drag force under controlled circumstances by a calculated value using the approximate area. We use the same approximate area for all calculations. So the drag coefficient is the ratio of the affected area divided by the approximate area. For example, let's talk about drag coefficient. If we take a boxy automobile, the air hits it like so, and dramatically reduces its speed. That's a drag coefficient of 0.6. We take a streamlined automobile, the air hits it and deflects around it, and there's a drag coefficient a little more than 0.4. 1/3 less, meaning we need 1/3 less power. So we took all the equations I just showed you and we solve it for velocity ratio, women over men. The black terms are the relative training and relative efficiency. And of course, you go faster with either one. There's a 1/3 power because we are solving the third power of velocity, and we get this odd 1/3. Here's the physiological part. The lean to weight ratio, the higher it is, the faster the woman goes, and man, of course, too. We divide by the drag ratio. So anything that reduces the drag ratio of a woman relative to a man makes that woman go faster. And that is going to be the primary explanation of what we're going to see. And then there's some mass ratio involved. If the velocity ratio of women over men is given by the red part only, then training and efficiency must be equal. Now, let me make a comment here. Women are less dense than men. They have more body fat, so they rise a little higher in the water. So when they swim at all velocities, they're going to have less drag. Less drag coefficient means less drag. As men and women slow down, what will happen is the woman slows down a little less. Rises a little higher. I'm exaggerating a bit. And for each slower velocity, the woman is higher, higher, higher. Therefore, at each slower velocity, the woman has less surface area affected by the water. So the drag is less and she gains relative speed. We're going to see that in the work that we're going to do in the data, as well as some explanatory curves I have. Now, previously, I divided Olympic history into World War I, World War II, the Cold War boycott period, and anti-drug period after '92. Women increased relative to men from 83 to 87 to 90%. Then I could generate, using 1,815 athletes, the physiological value, and it agreed within a tenth of a percent. And then more recently, the actual velocity ratio and the calculated one from physiology agree within tenths of a percent. So it is true that women have equal training and equal efficiency. So the drag ratio will be the important factor. I wanted to disaggregate. In this case, I aggregated all the events and the time and the distances, and men and women are equally trained and efficient. I want to disaggregate those, so I need more data to go distance by distance. I took 7 Olympic competitions from '92 to 2016, 10 FINA World Championships, 2001, 2019. There are 18 common events for men and women. I found 17 competitions for 12 of those events: 4 freestyle, 2 backstroke, breaststroke, butterfly, and individual medley. I found 10 competitions for 5 of the strokes: the 2 longest freestyle, 2 of the longer freestyle, and 3 of the shortest, the 3 shortest, back, breast, and fly. There was 13 competitions for 1 event, the 10-kilometer open water swim. So what did I find? For the 7 freestyle distances, including the open water swim, the velocity of men drop with distance, the velocity of women drop with distance. Starting with the shortest distance, the velocity ratio increased every single distance. 6 of them were significant, statistically significant. The 7th, going from 1,500 meters to 10K, was small, not statistically significant, but small, ending at about 93%. Moving to the 3 backstroke events, again, the velocity ratio drop with distance. I should say velocity drop with distance. Starting with the first velocity ratio, they increased for each longer distance. Statistically significant, that's 8 examples. For the 3 breaststroke events, velocity drop with distance, velocity ratio, starting with the shortest distance, increased for each of the 2 longer distance, statistically significant, that's 10. For the individual medley, there's 2 events, the velocity drop with distance, and going from the shorter to the longer distance, we had a statistically significant increase. So the velocity ratio has increased in all 11 examples, 10 of them statistically significant. But I haven't looked at butterfly. Again, the velocity drops with distance, but in the butterfly, going from the shorter 50 to 100 meters, women's velocity ratio dropped, and from 100 to 200 meters, it increased. I could, at this point, simply explain why 12 out of 13 distances increased and let it go at that. But no, I'm not happy with 12 out of 13. I want to know why all 13 cases happened. I want to know how the butterfly is different than those other strokes. Now, going back in time, quite a distance in time, when I was a competitive swimmer for 7 years, in my 3rd year of competition, the butterfly became, for the first time, a legal stroke. So I trained myself to do it. I'd seen it on television once or twice. And I made the mistake of telling my coach I learned to do butterfly. Coach said, "Hey, Ray, that's great, that's great. Only one other guy can do butterfly." I said, "You are going to have to fill in double. You're going to do your freestyle events and you're going to do butterfly." Well, I learned quickly I did not like butterfly because the energy rate was way higher than any other stroke. In all the other strokes, as you swim, there's a glide phase at the end of every stroke. In the butterfly, you're pulling yourself across the water on every stroke. So the energy rate is way higher. I had no trouble with stamina. The further I swam, the better I was in freestyle. When I was in college, I met the qualifying standard for the Olympic trials. But the butterfly, I didn't mind doing 50 meters or 50 yards. 100 I really didn't want to do because of the energy demand. And so that is the explanation for the change, what happens with women, the rate of energy use. And I'm going to show you some more of that about that in a minute. Okay, so Toussaint, using a flume of water, showed that drag coefficient drops more for women at lower frequency freestyle distances. As I mentioned, this is the drag coefficient for women, for men. This is velocity in the horizontal axis, drag coefficient. Women have a lower drag coefficient at all velocities, but at lower velocities, they drop off faster than men, giving them a relative advantage. I wasn't just interested in qualitativeness. I took the men's and women's times from 400 meters, the best times for Olympic champions, and at 1,500 meters for men and women. I calculated the velocity ratios, the change in velocity ratio, but I also calculated the change in the drag coefficient. Using that 1/3 power, I found that the 1/3 power of the change in the drag ratio was within 0.7% of the change in the velocity ratio, giving affirmation to the fact that it's the lower drag coefficient that gives women that advantage I just showed you. For the now that was freestyle. For the backstroke, I couldn't really take numbers off this curve. The horizontal axis is the power applied to the water. The vertical axis is the power generated by the athlete. Women lower here. The gap between men and women drops at lower and lower and lower and lower velocities. That is to say, women require relatively less power compared to men as the velocity becomes less, and that is entirely the drag coefficient again. Now, let's take an example of looking at all 4 strokes. Gatta and al. took 9 swimmers and took many hundreds of repetitions of each stroke, each excitation of a stroke. For the freestyle stroke, this thickness represents the span of drag coefficients over each segment of a stroke. Women lower, men higher. This tells you how much differential there is between men and women lower. We have exactly that same differential in backstroke. We have exactly the same differential in breaststroke. So all 3 of those, logically, women have the same kind of advantage at longer distances, at longer distances, less velocity. But there's much less variation in the butterfly. So women don't gain nearly as much in terms of drag swimming the butterfly. And then comes energy. There are 3 energy sources athletes use in general. In every case, your muscle requires adenosine triphosphate, ATP. From seconds to minutes, your anaerobic energy sources operate. ATP in your muscle makes your muscles work. Creatine phosphate converts to ATP, and muscle glycogen converts to ATP. So from seconds to minutes, you use non-oxygen anaerobic methodology to generate power. But you use that up fairly quickly. But fortunately, your aerobic mechanisms kick in from minutes to hours, where oxygen and blood glucose gives you ATP. That gets you through almost all Olympic distances. But you hit the wall after 2 hours. Only in the marathon is that going to be noticed. At that point, all the energy sources are gone. At the moment, we're looking at pool distances. So we begin with anaerobic energy sources and then aerobic. Women have less anaerobic capacity than men. Men have more aerobic capacity than men. So this is where the Achilles heel, you might say, for women is. Let's look at energy demand, energy rate. It's most for butterfly, then breaststroke, then backstroke, then freestyle. If we take a freestyle champion, the velocity is the highest. They need this much energy rate. Butterfly is the second fastest, so there would be a much higher energy rate required there. The third fastest is backstroke, a much lower energy rate than butterfly. Fourth is breaststroke, again, a much lower energy rate than butterfly. So the energy rate is far higher than butterfly than the other strokes. So through 10 kilometers, here's what we see. The drag coefficient drops more for women at lower speeds than for men in freestyle, backstroke, breaststroke. The individual medley is 3/4 of those strokes, so it follows those. So the 11 increased velocity ratios, 10 of which were statistically significant, they increase with distance. But there's not much drag variation in the butterfly to aid women at longer distances. And the higher energy rate for the butterfly depletes women's anaerobic energy sources faster than men at 100 meters. So women lose velocity ratio from 50 to 100. At 200 meters, both women and men use anaerobic energy, followed by aerobic energy. Now they just switch over to different locations. But both of them are moving to aerobic energy by the end of the swim. So women improve over 100 meters to a little better than the 50-meter figure in velocity ratio. So it has to do with both the drag ratio being less, therefore women have a gain, and a disadvantage at 100 meters butterfly. That explains all 13 of the cases we've seen. Now, let's move on to a big surprise. In the English crossing, a group of researchers looked at the fastest man and woman across the English Channel from 1900 to 2010. We looked at 10 kilometers when women were 93% as fast. We're going to triple that to more than 30 kilometers, which is 21 miles across the English Channel, 20 across Catalina, 34 kilometers English Channel, a little more than 32 Catalina. They found that for the English Channel, taking the fastest yearly man and woman, the women were 94% as fast, 94.4%, about a percent faster than at 10K. But here's the big surprise. Across the Catalina Channel, taking the fastest women and men from 1927 to 2010, the women were 108% as fast as the men. The women were 8% faster than the men across the Catalina Channel. And combining both of these, a little over a percent faster than men. I wanted a cross-validation. So I did another calculation of my own. And I took the fastest crossing in each direction by men and by women, and I compared them. From England to France, Peggy Lee Dean and Chad Hundaby had the fastest crossings of the English Channel. From France to England, Alison Streeter and Richard Davey had the fastest crossings. Together, taking the velocity ratios, women were 93.4% as fast. That's within 1% of the other figure, giving a good cross-validation. Now let's move to the Catalina Channel. From Catalina to the mainland, Grace Vanderbilt as fast as Frank Wise for the men. From mainland at Catalina, Peggy Lee Dean was fastest. Pete Husfeldt was fastest for the men. The average is 105.6%, 5.6% faster than the men. So that's within a little over 2%, 2.5% of the other values. So we have a good cross-validation. But I'm going to give you one more. Peggy Lee Dean has the fastest English Channel and the fastest Catalina Channel crossing. When she crossed the English Channel, best crossing actually, her best crossing was 23 minutes slower than the best man. But across the Catalina Channel, her best time was 22 minutes faster than the best man. 23 slower, 22 faster. Gives a validation to this differential. Women faster across Catalina, slower across English Channel. I need to talk to you briefly about Alison Streeter. She swam the English Channel 43 times. I didn't misspeak. 43 times. 3 of those were consecutive and nonstop. It took over 20 hours for her to do that. Consecutive and nonstop, almost 30. That is amazing. An amazing feat of strength that no one has ever done since or before. Okay, so taking those times together, the yearly best and the best of all time, we get 93.9% for women compared to men, about 94%. Across the Catalina Channel, 8% faster and 5.6% faster, averaging 6.8% faster, 106.8%, and pretty close to even taking both of them. The logical question is, what is so different about the English and Catalina Channel that we see roughly more than a 13% differential between the two? What is so different about them? Well, we talked about energy sources. So now they both hit the wall at 2 hours, and these are many times that. Women have more body fat. That gives them energy and insulation. Energy at more than 2 hours, you burn body fat. Lynn Cox once lost 30 pounds in a long distance swim. Causes insulation as well, giving them more energy. But the Catalina and English Channel have different tidal flows. At the Catalina Channel, the tides go in a straight line compared to the swimmer. Swimmer goes with and against the tide. So they are going to have that additional, women will have additional drag benefit because they're swimming directly with or against the tide. But in the English Channel, the tide goes crosswise, buffeting the swimmers who follow an S-curve. Men and women are moved crosswise, both by the tide, disrupting their stroke pattern and negating some of the women's drag advantage in the forward direction. So let's think of it this way. Because of more body fat, as of both energy stores and insulation, there's about a 7% gain for women from 10 kilometers when they were 93% as fast as men to 30 kilometers. But across the English Channel, women are buffeted back and forth in one direction and in the other direction by the tide, as are men. But by that buffeting, most of the surface area is in contact with water, raising the drag coefficient to nearly 1. And women lose about 6% of that drag advantage they usually have. So for the English Channel, women gain 7 and lose 6. So they're about 1% ahead from 10 kilometers to 30. So they go from 93 to 94, about that. For the Catalina Channel, women gain about 7%, having more body fat for energy and insulation. But now they're swimming with the tide or possibly against the tide. But as they swim slower, they'll have a lower drag advantage. So they gain about 6% compared to 10 kilometers. So they gain 7 plus 6 on the Catalina Channel, 13, compared to 7 minus 6 across the English Channel. So that explains the difference between the English and Catalina Channel. Maybe there's one other thing. Women are smart enough to know there's a lot of great white sharks. I live near the Catalina Channel. I see it all the time. I don't think I'd want to swim it necessarily. But of course, they're told that your supply boat will probably scare the great white sharks away. I think the women are smart enough to swim a little faster just to play safe. Now, I told you I was going to introduce you to some amazing women. Gertrude Ederle. In 1926, she wanted to swim the English Channel become the first woman. In 1926, women had been in the Olympics swimming only for 14 years. Women were not yet competing in athletics in 1926. That started 2 years later. So you can imagine how many people told her how crazy she was trying to cross the English Channel. Well, her own coach kept saying, Gertrude, Gertrude, get it back in the boat. You're going too fast. Get back in the boat. And she said, why? Gertrude went on to finish in 14 hours, 34 minutes, 2 hours faster than the best men's time ever. That is a gutsy woman. By the way, this article, and she lived to be 98 years old, the article about her was taken from Kick-Ass Female Athletes Through the Ages. If that isn't her, I don't know who is. I got one more for you. Charlotte Cooper was the first female Olympic champion in 1900 in tennis. Charlotte Cooper, at the age of 30, won the gold medal. And then she went on to be past 90 and still going strong as an irrepressible person. By itself, what I just said is pretty remarkable. But that is only the tip of the iceberg. 4 years before this photo was taken, at the age of 26, she lost her hearing in a sport where you react by the sound of the ball off the racket. She won this Olympic championship, not in a Paralympic, that didn't exist. She won it against hearing people. She won 4 more Wimbledon championships of her 5 as a deaf tennis player. And she clearly went on to have a full and complete life. That is a remarkable woman. So when someone tells you you can't do something, I want you to think about Gertrude Ederle, and I want you to think about Charlotte Cooper. And maybe the impossible is not all that impossible. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And next time we do this, let's hope we're a lot closer together and on the same day. Okay, everybody, you take care.